Good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending our webinar on Bill C-7 with Alex Schadenberg from the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. My name is Michelle Smiley and I coordinate pro-life for the Archdiocese of Vancouver. On March 11th this year, the Government of Canada forced a closure on the debate for Bill C-7, Canada's euthanasia expansion bill, and then passed the bill with the Senate amendments approving euthanasia for mental illness. On March 17th, Canada's Senate passed the bill. In less than 5 years, we have passed a law legalizing assisted suicide and a law expanding it. This bill, known by the euphemism Medical Assistance in Dying, MAiD, has had far-reaching effects in Canada. We have essentially said to people who are suffering that they have less worth. We are using euthanasia as just another option in giving healthcare to a vulnerable population. MAiD should never be offered to a patient in a hospital or a long-term care setting. It is stated in the legislation that this is a patient-driven ask. If a healthcare professional begins to talk with you about this or someone you love, you have every right to shut them down. It is also important, if possible, to be an advocate for someone in the hospital and support them in this part of their journey. This webinar will be recorded and made available after the talk. We will also send you the links to the various resources and statements in the beginning and ending slides. I would like to particularly point out the Compassionate Community Care Helpline. This organization is available to answer your questions or help in any way as you navigate the healthcare system, especially with concerns to end-of-life care. Our speaker tonight is Alex Schadenberg. Alan is the Executive Director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition and the Chairperson of the EPC International. He has authored many articles published in newspapers worldwide and has published the book, Exposing Vulnerable People to Euthanasia and Assisted Suicide. Alex maintains the world's most widely read blog on issues related to euthanasia and assisted suicide and has co-produced the Euthanasia Deception documentary and Fatal Flaws film. Alex will be available for questions after his talk. Please write them in the question and answer tab. We appreciate Alex taking the time for this webinar as it is 10 p.m. in Toronto. Welcome, Alex.
It's great being with you, Michelle. And when you asked me to speak, I thought that'd be a great idea to do this. This is a presentation actually that I made for the first time. I presented it for the first time last Monday. So the good news is I have done this presentation before, if you're worried. Nonetheless, this will, I think, pretty comprehensively go over the issue, but also talk about where we can go next. For some reason, oh, there we go. So the current situation, Canada, so some of this was already covered by Michelle, and that is that Canada legalized MAiD, medical aid in dying, which is euthanasia and assisted suicide, in June of 2016. And what we have is a situation that in less than 4 years was the new bill was presented. So now in less than 5 years, we have Bill C-7 passed. So Canada passed this law to expand euthanasia and assisted suicide. And it was all based, they said, on the Truchon court decision. So I'm going to get into that in 1 second. The expansion, they said, so what the Quebec court decision, the Truchon decision was, is it was based on 2 people with disabilities. And the 2 people with disabilities, Gladue and Truchon, claimed that the law discriminated against them because they were not terminally ill, they were not dying, but as they said, they were suffering. So they wanted to die by euthanasia. And so the expansion of this bill C-7, was then a response to Truchon. Now Truchon, the court decision came down during the last election. And what is very interesting about that court decision, it was they did not appeal the decision. The federal government or the Quebec government did not appeal the decision. You have to put this into perspective of Canadian history, that Canada always does an appeal of a lower court decision dealing with serious issues such as euthanasia or assisted suicide. But in Truchon, they left it. So what did Bill C-7 do? Well, Bill C-7 removed the requirement in law that a person's natural death be reasonably foreseeable. That was the Truchon decision. It said that you must remove that the requirement that natural death be reasonably foreseeable in order to qualify for an assisted death. So that meant that people who were terminally ill could die by euthanasia. The Quebec court decision only required that. That was it. So that part of the bill was all that Truchon required. Bill C-7 went further. It permitted a doctor or nurse practitioner to lethally inject a person who's incapable of consenting. So in the original law, Bill C-14, it required the person to be capable of consenting at the time of death. This bill changes that. So if you were previously approved for euthanasia, euthanasia is lethal injection. Okay, so if you were previously approved for the euthanasia, then you became incompetent between the time of approval and death. They could go ahead and do it anyway, even though you're incapable of consenting at the time of death. Now, I contend that this actually contravenes Carter, because Carter made it clear that you needed to be able to consent to the act of euthanasia, or MAiD. Bill C-7 waived the 10-day waiting period if a person's natural death is deemed to be reasonably foreseeable. So what Bill C-7 did is it created the two situations: someone who is not dying and someone who is dying. So what it did is it used this term, natural death is deemed reasonably foreseeable, which was already in the law, even though it was never defined. And it said that if your natural death is deemed to be reasonably foreseeable, there'll be no waiting period, meaning you could have a same-day death. Someone goes to the doctor having a bad day, dies the same day. But if it is deemed that your natural death is not reasonably foreseeable, there'd be a 90-day waiting period. Now, this is a very concerning thing, because the term natural death is deemed to be reasonably foreseeable has never been defined. And over the time of the original passage of the euthanasia law in June 2016 until today, that term has really changed in its understanding based on what doctors have done, based on the application of the law. So in fact, what does it actually mean? Well, what it does mean is that they say you're not terminally ill, but you didn't have to be terminally ill under the previous law anyway, because that had already been reinterpreted to mean that you have grievous and irremediable medical conditions that might lead to terminal. It was all been fudged already anyway. So what we have now is a situation where we're going to face in the future a court challenge of this 90-day waiting period. Now, why am I saying that? Well, there'll be situations where doctors who are more, how would you say, you have a couple of euthanasia clinics, for instance, in BC. The doctors who are at the euthanasia clinics will be far more, how would you say, liberal with their idea as to who they apply this to. Whereas another physician who might do one euthanasia death a year will tell someone, well, you're not dying, therefore you have a 90-day waiting period. So what I'm saying is it will not be equally applied, the law, right? And if it's not equally applied, there'll be a challenge in the court to strike it down. So what I'm suggesting in the near future, which is very sad about the situation, is that we could have this 90-day waiting period even struck down by a future court decision, because there's an inequality in the law. Bill C-7 originally falsely claimed to prevent euthanasia for people with mental illness. Now, why did I argued that it originally falsely claimed this, because it said that there would be, it had in the law, in Bill C-7, it said that mental illness is not a disability, disease, et cetera, which meant you didn't qualify for euthanasia for mental illness alone. That didn't mean you couldn't have euthanasia for mental illness. It meant that if you had other conditions and also mental illness, then you would qualify, but mental illness alone wouldn't qualify. I argued that that wasn't actually the reality of the law. And why did I argue that? Well, because the law says that you could have euthanasia for physical or psychological suffering that is intolerable to the person, and that it cannot be relieved in a way that the person considers acceptable. So this is not what you call something you can assess. This is based on how I feel. So if I feel that my psychological suffering is intolerable, and I feel that the treatment that might relieve me of this intolerable suffering is also unacceptable, then I qualify for euthanasia. That's how the law is written. Okay, it's not clear what it means because it's defined based on how I feel about my own life. Therefore, since psychological suffering was already defined to include mental illness, therefore I argued that it had already allowed it. Okay, but then what the Senate did is they amended the bill and made it very clear that it would allow euthanasia for mental illness. So what happened is that was then passed by the Senate, and Parliament accepted that amendment, but they put a clause in the law saying that there'll be a 2-year hold on euthanasia for mental illness, so the government can devise protocols around that type of death. So they're saying right now there isn't euthanasia for mental illness because there's a 2-year waiting period. I'm suggesting that in fact, no one would ever get prosecuted for an act of euthanasia for someone with mental illness alone at this point. I'm suggesting that in fact it's technically legal now. And I don't like to give the other side, you know, areas where they can go with things, but really it seems to me that when you don't define something effectively, that means it's possible. So I'm going to give you some data out of Ontario only because we have all the Ontario data. BC, I've asked BC over and over again to give me the data, and they refuse. They tell me it's privacy and things like that. Canada is very slow in collecting data, the federal government, but I do have the Ontario data. Ontario is, and also Alberta gives you data. But Ontario data gives us a lot of indication of what's going on. So anyway, as of December 31st, 2020, there were 6,696 reported assisted deaths in Ontario. This is an important number because there were 6,694 euthanasia deaths, that's lethal injection. 2 were assisted suicide. Okay, self-administered. In 2020, there was 2,378 reported assisted deaths, euthanasia deaths. That was a 33% increase from 2019. So there was a 33% increase last year. That's significant, okay? Now we don't have the federal data because it doesn't exist. They haven't provided it for us. We just don't have it. So the Ontario data at least gives you an indication that there's a massive increase that occurred in 2020. In July 2020, Health Canada released its first annual report on MAiD. The data that's gathered for that report comes from the doctors who did the death, the doctors or nurse practitioners, because that's how the law reads, doctors or nurse practitioners who actually carried out the death. So how the law works is that the doctor or nurse practitioner who lethally injects you is also the one who sends in the report. It's a self-reporting system. So first of all, the Health Canada report did not go into any issues that may uncover some problems with the law. It just didn't. It ignored it completely. All it did is report on the basic data, the average age of the death, whether they were more likely to have cancer or not, where did they live, this kind of thing, right? The data report indicated that in 2019, there were 5,631 reported euthanasia deaths in Canada. And I say reported because there's nothing in the law that allows or has a situation where the coroner's digging up unreported deaths. So, I mean, if there were unreported deaths, we wouldn't know about it, is what I'm saying. There's no way in the law to know how many unreported deaths there were in Canada. And there's been no studies or anything. That was up from 4,467 in 2018. And as of December 31st, 2019, there had been 13,946 euthanasia deaths. Now, based on a 33% increase in Ontario in 2020, there was therefore approximately likely somewhere around 7,500, could be a little bit less. You know, it could be, remember, British Columbia, it would be good to know that data because they're actually the highest number, the highest percentage of euthanasia deaths in any provinces in British Columbia. The highest percentage of any euthanasia deaths in anywhere in Canada is on Vancouver Island, a city of Victoria in particular. Anyway, Ontario has had a 33% increase, so therefore we can estimate that somewhere around 7,500 assisted deaths happened in Canada in 2020. So we were successful in defeating euthanasia bills in Canada. We defeated the euthanasia bill in 2020 by a vote of 228 to 59. And what happened is after we were successful in killing these euthanasia bills, one after another in Canada, the courts got involved. This is what happened. So we must continue to tell people that this legislation, what it does and how it does it. It's important to talk about this. It's important to talk about. You know, I say here just yesterday, I meant to actually a week ago because I put together this PowerPoint. Actually, I finished it on Monday. So it was on, just yesterday, I was speaking to a woman who was opposed to euthanasia, but didn't realize it was legal in Canada. And I thought, how could this be? How could this be? But we must work with everyone who cares about this issue. We must expose the truth, and we must help find stories and share stories about this, because this is the strongest way we have in this culture to undo this acceptance of euthanasia. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information about the US, because as bad as it is in Canada, things are going on in the US. Assisted suicide is now illegal in California, Colorado, Hawaii, Maine, New Jersey, Oregon, Vermont, Washington State, and the District of Columbia. And it was just sadly recently, within the last couple of weeks, legalized in New Mexico. Montana has assisted suicide, but it's not technically legal, even though they had a court decision. So it's similar to Canada where we get these court decisions. Montana had the Baxter court decision, which created what they call a defensive consent. So that's, and assisted suicide this year has been debated in 15 US states. I already said, New Mexico legalized it. Euthanasia is legal in the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and sadly it was recently legalized in Spain. That is the first, majority Catholic country that's legalized euthanasia. Switzerland and Germany permit assisted suicide. Portugal recently passed the euthanasia law, but the Portugal Constitutional Court decided that the law was unconstitutional. So what you had is the president of Portugal who thought that the law was unconstitutional, so he sent it to the Constitutional Court and they struck it down. The World Medical Association, the American Medical Association continue to oppose euthanasia and assisted suicide. So when Canada legalized euthanasia assisted suicide MAiD in June 2016, legislation required a 5-year review of the law. It's in. So if you look at Bill C-14 from June of 2016, you see in Section 10, the section they added, which was actually a bit of a compromise to allow certain members who are uncomfortable with legalizing euthanasia and they were concerned. It allowed them to have this review built right into the law. And the review was to begin in June of 2020. The review has not happened. So we expanded our euthanasia law in Canada and never did the review. The government agreed when passing Bill C-7 to establish a review of the law. Well, they already agreed to it in the first legislation. And the law, and they said that would be comprised of members of parliament and senators. So in fact, the Bill C-7 said that the review would include 10 members of parliament and 5 senators. Actually, there is a time frame. The review was actually agreed to. Today's the 16th. Yesterday, the House of Commons approved there to be a review of the euthanasia law. The problem is that the government actually is not thinking of the review in the way that they actually meant it. So in Bill C-14, when you read Bill C-14 Section 10, you see it's very clear. They were intending a fulsome review of the law. The government now it seems to be looking at issues which were not legalized by Bill C-7. So somehow we have to be able to voice ourselves in such a way to allow the wider review to occur. That's what our goal is right now. There's no time frame right now set for the review, but possibly there's going to be an election this spring. And if there's an election this spring, now it may not happen until June, but whatever, that would of course affect any review or anything else happening with the government. The government has suggested the review would examine issues such as child euthanasia, euthanasia requests by advance directive, and protocols for euthanasia for mental illness. Now let's get down to brass tacks. The Senate actually approved 2 major amendments to Bill C-7. The first was euthanasia for mental illness alone. The government accepted that. The second one was euthanasia requests by advance directive. So what does that mean? That means that somebody could request euthanasia in their advance directive, saying that if I were incompetent or if I had dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., whatever it might be, that I would want to die by euthanasia. And then what would happen is at the time, then you wouldn't be making a choice. Somebody else would be making that choice. They'd be saying, oh, my mother said in her advance directive that if she were in this medical condition, she would want euthanasia. Or the doctor might say, we haven't looked at your mother's advance directive lately. Oh, it requests euthanasia. I think we better go ahead and do that. The point of it is remember, advance directives come into power when you lose your ability to properly consent. So that means if we extend euthanasia to people with an advance based on advance directives, you're then euthanizing somebody who's clearly incapable of consenting and incapable of changing their mind. So you have to really think what this means. Anyway, the Senate approved that, and then of course Parliament didn't approve that. So that's how this all comes together. The issue of child euthanasia, well, you might realize right now in the Netherlands, the issue that they're debating is extending euthanasia to children. And we're not going to get into that. That would be a whole other talk I could do about what's going on in the Netherlands and Belgium. Euthanasia Prevention Coalition considers the review of the law as an opportunity to challenge how the current law actually works. In fact, we have been working with a group of people and we've put together already a 100-page document that I know I'm going to have to edit down because we've been trying to present to Canadians exactly what's already been going on with the law. Like all these stories that have happened throughout Canada have all been garnered into one document, and we're planning to publish that document very soon. The quick expansion of Canada's euthanasia laws are concerning, but we're also concerned about the stories of pressure and concern. The willingness to accept euthanasia for mental illness, human rights of people with disabilities, and the prospect of more expansion and change. So let's give you a few of the stories of what happened. In August 2016, Candace Lewis, who was 25, she was born with multiple disabilities. She was pressured by her doctor to ask for an assisted death. Candace was very sick, no question about it, and she was receiving treatment. The doctor asked her mother if she knew that assisted death was legalized, and her mother said no. The doctor said that he supported assisted death and wanted to help her. The doctor was told that they weren't interested in assisted death. The doctor told her mother that she was selfish. Then the doctor challenged Candace and said to Candace, "Do you know how sick you are?" So what happened in this case is Sheila, right here, Candace's mother, took Candace home because she was convinced by the doctor that Candace was dying. She was told Candace was very sick. They made it sound like Candace was dying, and so she took Candace home. She decided, well, if you're pressuring us, Candace comes home. If she's going to die, she'll die at home. Well, Candace survived that, and the whole story is a lot based on the fact that Candace survived all that. She got better. She got better actually with the help of all the people in the neighborhood, etc., who basically cared for her, because at the time she was very sick and she needed basic 24 hours care. Now, Roger Foley actually is from London, Ontario, where I'm speaking to you from right now, and he lives with cerebral ataxia, which is a degenerative neurological condition. And he launched a lawsuit in August of 2018 when the hospital, which is actually the London Health Sciences Centre, offered him MAiD, euthanasia, but would not provide him with assisted living. So what actually happened in Roger's case is the Ontario government denied him self-directed care. So in Ontario, and I think British Columbia might have this also, I know that most provinces in Canada have this program. It's a self-directed care program where Roger would hire his own caregivers. Now, the reason this was important to Roger is that he had a caregiver who had he needed to be fed. He can't feed himself in his physical condition. He needed to be fed. He needed people to take care of everything for him, and he was he nearly died of food poisoning in the one case. The other thing is one of his caregivers accidentally left the stove on and then left for home, and the stove was on. Of course, Roger couldn't get out of bed to do anything about that. So Roger's like, I'm not safe at home without self-directed care. I need to hire my own people who I trust, who are working for me. And the government turned him down for self-directed care. So he refused to leave the hospital. He said, until I get self-directed care, I'm not going to leave the hospital. So the hospital said to him, you've got two choices. You can pay us $1,500 a day, or you can have euthanasia. Those are your two choices. In the end, he was given self-directed care. So he's still alive today. The lawsuit that was launched, he's still fighting that lawsuit. In July 2019, Alan Nichols, who was living in Asia, Alan was, my internet connection is unstable. Okay, Alan was not sick. He had lived with chronic depression for many years. He died by euthanasia. Alan was not physically ill, but was experiencing suicidal ideation. This was not new for him. He had gone through suicidal ideation many times in his life, and he wanted to die. He was experiencing suicidal ideation. The doctors approved him for euthanasia. His family begged the doctors to reevaluate Alan, and the doctors refused. He died by euthanasia. In August 2020, Isabel McKenzie, who's a seniors advocate in British Columbia, reported that some nursing home residents had requested an assisted death based on social isolation related to the COVID pandemic. And you might remember those stories. There were several of them that were going on, and several in BC also. In November 2020, long-term care resident Nancy Russell, she's actually in Toronto area, requested and died by euthanasia because she wanted to avoid another COVID-19 lockdown. The story referred to Russell as a social and spry person who had suffered during the first lockdown. The lockdown of COVID has had a very difficult effect on a lot of people. She had other health-related issues, but she had no terminal condition. She was not dying. She was 90, I guess, so I guess someone would say that her natural death was reasonably foreseeable. I shouldn't laugh at that, but that is true, actually, how it's defined, sadly enough, how it's been defined. Euthanasia for mental illness. Well, this creates a real question around killing someone who's treatable, but who has questionable ability to consent. This is a picture of psychiatrist Dr. Sun Yu Gain. Now, You know, he is actually the past president of the Canadian Psychiatric Association. So he's quite an important person. He testified to the government that it is impossible to predict whether mental illness conditions are irremediable. Now, why is that important? Because the law says that you must be experiencing an irremediable condition. This is one of the reasons why the disability community, of course, I was trying to get it to in a minute, is so upset about Bill C-7, because how the laws are defined really does define somebody with a disability. Nonetheless, the Council of Canadian Academies also concluded that there's no evidence to support providing MAiD solely for mental illness. So why did the government do this? I'm gonna actually throw something at you a little bit. On November 24th of 2020, Justice Minister MAiD was speaking to the pre-Senate committee. So the Senate, because the government was trying to fast track Bill C-7, they asked the Senate to have pre-hearings, so hearings before they actually had hearings on the bill per se. And MAiD said to the senators that he wanted to expand euthanasia to people with mental illness alone, but he didn't have time to do it. It would have taken more time. That's what he had said. So I think when he actually said that, he was giving the senators permission to amend the bill. That's what I think happened. Psychiatrist Dr. John Mayer, who's an editor with the Journal of Ethics in Mental Health, told CBC News, "I have been specializing in treatment-resistant mental illness for 17 years. He says, "I want to scream from the political and juridical mountaintop that treatment-resistant does not mean untreatable." Because one of the arguments that have been made by the senators is that people who are treatment-resistant then could qualify for euthanasia based on the fact that they have an irremediable condition. He said, "If you have done this work for a long time, it becomes very clear that the main reason for wanting to die is desperate loneliness and existential hopelessness." Have we heard that before? Yes, we have. In fact, in my experience, that is the primary reason people ask for euthanasia. They're going through a difficult medical condition and they are lonely, they are feeling hopeless, they feel that their life has lost purpose or value. This is the reason they're asking for it. And actually the issue of pain, as much as it is the issue that we hear in the media, etc., is not the primary reason people ask for euthanasia. Dr. John Mayer told CTV News, "Allowing medical assistance in dying solely because of a mental illness doesn't take into account that those suffering from severe mental illness may not be capable of making the best decision for themselves." Alan Nichols was not capable of making the best decision for himself. His family were quite aware that he had gone through suicidal ideation on many occasions. He went up and down, up and down. This was his life experience for many years. That doesn't mean that he should die when he's at his downtime. Then Mayer said, "Last week I had a patient in her 30s who refused treatment because she wants MAiD." Now she can't get it technically for 2 years, but I'm arguing, sadly, I don't think that's actually true. I wish that were true. This is a young woman who will get better, who literally has, she's in her 30s, has at least 50 years left to live, is what he told CTV News. So, in Canada, the approval and reporting system denies effective oversight of the law. So here we have a system in Canada. And how does the system actually work? So you have a system where a doctor or nurse practitioner have to approve you for euthanasia and assisted suicide. It's almost always euthanasia, lethal injection, right? It's almost, and that's a form of homicide. That's what it is. And even in Canada at this current time, it's still a form of homicide, because where do you find the euthanasia exemption? It's in the Homicide Act. So the one thing the Canadian government did honestly was they legalized euthanasia by leaving it in the Homicide Act. They created an exception to homicide. It's what they did with Bill C-14 in 2016. So what the law does is it allows the same medical professional to approve the death. And then, of course, a second physician or nurse practitioner has to then approve whether the first physician or nurse practitioner is correct, who then can do the lethal injection. So the same person can do the lethal injection, is the same medical professional who's then required to report the death. So you have a self-reporting system. This self-reporting system protects the medical professional who participates in assisted death, and it makes effective oversight of the law impossible. Now, why do I say this? Well, obviously speaking, when I'm driving down the highway at a super speed, am I calling the police to come get me? The answer is no. It's the same thing with the physicians. If a physician who's pro-euthanasia is going to do something which might be considered a gray area, are they going to report it as if it's a gray area? Or are they going to report it as if it's black and white? It's quite clear. They don't want the attention that might come from a report that looks a bit interesting. Now, the Quebec reports are different. Actually, it's funny. In Quebec, we know that there's underreporting going on. The rest of Canada, we don't know because the reporting system doesn't give us any information to find it. So if you want to find any abuse at all going on in Canada, you have to look at the Quebec reports. Now, this is a funny thing, of course, in Canada. You've got the federal reports on euthanasia and you've got the Quebec reports. And as you know, Quebec has a different law than the rest of Canada on euthanasia, okay? The Quebec report actually, which is interesting enough, has a multiple reporting system. And because it has a multiple reporting system, when you analyze the data, you can clearly identify there are deaths that were not reported, okay, by euthanasia. But people don't self-report questionable deaths. They just don't. Doctors will not do that. They don't need the headache of having to explain themselves to some government commission. So what can we do? Well, we have a problem with conscience rights in Canada. And we have a problem of conscience rights all over Canada. Now, in Manitoba did pass a conscience rights bill in 2017. Now, it only deals with the issue of medical aid in dying. So Manitoba physicians on other issues don't have the same conscience rights as they do with medical aid in dying. It just is what they did in Manitoba. The rest of Canada has not passed conscience rights laws. Ontario is actually the worst jurisdiction in the world for the issue of conscience rights. So Kelly Block right now is introduced Bill C-268, which will actually go to its first hour debate on April 29th. That's this month. It will have its first hour debate. And this is actually identical to the David Anderson bill. It was actually a little changed, but it's nearly identical to David Anderson's bill from the previous Parliament. So this bill would protect conscience rights through the criminal code. It's actually a very well worded bill. Now, if an election is called or happens and C-268 then disappears, because if an election is called, that would happen, there's clear commitment from pro-life conservative MPs to bring this bill back again in the next Parliament. So this issue is not dead no matter how we look at it. The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario require that a physician do an effective referral for medical procedures that physicians object to. So that's all issues, right? And an effective referral is defined as referral for the purpose of the act. So what they're saying to physicians that have a conscientious objection to killing, you don't have to kill someone, but you do have to send them to the killer. This is a serious problem because a physician who's unwilling to kill you will also be unwilling to send you to the killer. So you have a clear problem of this effective referral rule in Ontario because quite a few physicians are now in a situation where they feel they are pressured by the government because they might lose their position. So let's say a physician who works in a hospital or a younger physician, they're feeling pressure that they have to participate in these acts because they are afraid they're going to lose their medical license. But what it's also done is in Ontario, there's several physicians who I know who were good physicians, people who would be members of, let's say, the Christian Medical Dental Society or the Catholic Physicians Guild, who've left Ontario. They left Ontario. Why did they leave Ontario? I'm assuming this may have happened in BC also, but I don't know. I know far more about Ontario because I happen to live here. Don't hold that against me. But anyway, why did they leave Ontario? Because of the effective referral policy. They were saying I can go to South Carolina, for instance, where there are sick people. My medical license is going to be good in South Carolina. I just have to contact the medical authorities ahead of time and get them to approve me. There are sick people there, but I don't have to worry about my conscience rights there. And so several physicians have left, young physicians have left Ontario saying, I don't need this problem. I really don't need it. And that's a real loss for Canada and for people across Canada who we're going to lose these physicians. The other thing is, of course, medical schools, the pressures they're putting on students to say, well, you have to leave your conscience at the door if you want to be a physician or a nurse practitioner. This issue is possibly going to be dealt with very soon because there's a member of provincial parliament in Ontario who's interested in bringing forward a bill to correct this problem. trampling on conscience rights. Well, you had the Delta Hospice in BC. The Delta Hospice Society has been vilified for wanting to have a hospice that doesn't kill people. That's, of course, why they lost their funding. Now, the government will say it's because they weren't willing to follow procedure or whatever. Well, the procedure was they had to be involved with killing, and they refused to be involved with killing. The reason the Delta Hospice Society wanted to change their articles of incorporation to say that they were a religiously based organization was because in British Columbia, if you are a religiously affiliated hospice, you don't have to do or provide euthanasia. But if you're a secular hospice, you have to provide euthanasia. So the Delta Hospice Society, why was this issue such a big issue? Because the government decided to make an example of them. Now, it's possible that they picked on certain people because they felt it easier to do so. No, your BC government decided specifically that the way you're going to stop all hospices from saying we're not going to do euthanasia, or most of the hospices who didn't want to do euthanasia, the way you're going to battle that is you're going to take on one and you're going to trample them right down. You're going to take away their funding. You're going to steal their building from them. You're going to do all of that. And then you're going to, of course, have all the other hospices in such fear that they will acquiesce to whatever you want. And that's what happened. You know, you can say whatever you want about, you know, the politics of the situation. That is exactly what happened. Most hospices want nothing to do with euthanasia, but they're being forced to participate. And based on fear of losing their funding, I'm assuming most of them are now participating. There is a way to deal with that, though. But that's another issue. Very few people ask for an assisted death because of physical pain. The data is very clear. Very, 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 very few people are asking for it because of physical pain. Most people ask for an assisted death because they're experiencing a difficult, life-limiting disease or condition that they feel that their life has lost purpose, meaning, or hope. They feel that there's no one who cares about them. They feel they're a burden on others. These are the reasons they're asking for someone to kill them. These are normal human feelings. And when a person is lonely and depressed or socially isolated or feeling abandoned, they feel that they might have fear of future pain. That's true. Many of them list fear of future pain. But if you look at the data, almost nobody's asking for it because they are immediately in deep pain. I'm not saying nobody is. I'm saying the numbers are very small, okay? These are all normal human feelings, and when a person's lonely, depressed, socially isolated, or feeling abandoned, their lives are threatened by euthanasia. All of our lives are threatened by euthanasia. Why? Because we are human beings. We all go through these same feelings, these same situations to different degrees. Now, you might say, oh, so-and-so I know has great faith. They would never consider this. And I'm hoping that you're right. But I also recognize as a human person that there are times in people's life when they become so darkened, so down, so closed to their situation that they can't see beyond. Some people have asked for euthanasia. I got a call a couple weeks ago from a friend of mine and someone who's actively involved in Knights of Columbus in Ontario, and a friend of theirs who used to be the Grand Knight had asked for euthanasia and was approved for euthanasia and was going to die by euthanasia. And this guy was calling me up because he wanted to know what he could do. How should he talk to him? How can he convince him otherwise? And we had conversations and went back and forth. I didn't know this man who ended up dying by euthanasia. I didn't know him. So me speaking to him may not have been effective at all, but he had other friends who were completely upset that this is the way it was going. And he ended up dying by euthanasia. You would say, was he a man of no faith? Well, sadly, he got so darkened by a situation, he felt that that was the best way out. And I'm not justifying it. I'm talking about why it's so important as a human being to recognize this problem of euthanasia. Once you get on the euthanasia train, it's very hard to get off. And I'm talking about it as we have to understand what it means to be human, right? It's people deal with things sometimes in an inappropriate manner. We live in a culture of loneliness and isolation and social abandonment. And with COVID, it's only gotten worse. It's only gotten worse. The factors that drive people to consider suicide or seek an assisted death, these are factors that are being normalized in our culture. There are more people who live alone, lack significant community, feel hopeless, or feel that their life has no purpose or value. They feel like there's no reason to live. There's many people going through this situation more than ever before, higher percentages than ever before. Now that euthanasia is legal, people are asking or seeking death by euthanasia as a way out, deaths of despair. I've written several articles about this problem of deaths of despair. This is a situation where people are making decisions that are not the same as what they would normally do. Okay? The human being is communal. We're made to be with others. Loneliness and depression are therefore, these are universal human experiences, and even though they vary based on one situation, they affect all of us, okay? Everyone, we react a little different, okay? But we all have these same feelings, emotions, realities. In other words, it's normal for a human being to feel lonely and to become depressed when they are alone. It's normal. But you know, it's also normal that when someone's going through a very difficult time in their life and traveling through that, and they don't want to be a burden on others, and they might be spending a lot of time alone, or they feel like they have lost a sense of purpose or meaning, it's normal that they might feel they want to die. That doesn't mean they should be killed, but that means they might ask for it. And we can make a difference in others' lives. This is the challenge of people who truly care and believe in life. Euthanasia affects everyone. Physical or psychological illness and suffering are universal human experiences. We say, well, can we just not eliminate the suffering? I'm sorry, I'm a human being. You cannot eliminate the suffering. You can lessen the suffering. You can help control the suffering. You can do things to make people feel better. You can deal with all that, but we're not going to eliminate suffering. It's not going to happen. It's not possible. I have a physical body. I'm an emotional being. Nobody wants to suffer. And in fact, people today view suffering as worse than death. That's how the culture has shifted so greatly. Suffering has become an acceptable reason to kill by euthanasia. And in some cases, it's the primary reason why someone died by euthanasia. So we need to be concerned about people who lose hope and purpose and fall into despair. And these people are around us. We know them in our church communities. We know them in our neighborhoods. They are our friends. They are our family. They are everyone we know going through these situations. Euthanasia threatens my life. Human experience tells me that it's normal for me, if I'm experiencing a serious illness or personal difficulties and loneliness, to fear for the future, to question my purpose for living, to experience existential distress or situational depression, or to lose hope. I'm a bit of an up personality, so you know, maybe I'm a bit new, but according to this, there's 156 people on this call right now. I guarantee you this issue affects you, and it affects many of you in a great way. Suffering alone and loneliness and isolation, depression, loss of hope or purpose are leading reasons why people are asking for death. And all of us experience these feelings. We all go through these experiences to different degrees. The culture of abandonment that's leading to an assisted death, culture of an assisted death can be changed by caring. The only way you can undo killing is through love. That doesn't mean we'll always be successful. That doesn't mean that when I'm speaking to someone on the phone who's calling me in distress, that somehow I'm going to have that silver bullet and they will feel affirmed and they will want to continue living. Sometimes that happens. Sadly, sometimes people continue to seek death. It is essential that people who feel that their life lacks value, feel that no one cares, or that they're offered purpose. You know, when we talk about these things, someone who's terminally ill, they often talk about, like in this whole thing about Chochnow's research. Harvey Chochnov is a psychiatrist in Winnipeg who did groundbreaking research on this concept of the will to live. What Chochnov found is that if I can't find, how would you say, long-term purpose for this person, or if I can't find reason in the long term for this person to live, we can find little reasons. And this is what the will to live studies found. It found that, you know, someone might ask for death, and then the next day you visit them and they have no interest in death. And the reason was is their grandchildren came to visit. Sadly, with COVID, no one comes to visit right now. It's a serious problem. Anyway, we as a significant community can help provide that purpose, support, genuine hope. This is our purpose. This is the reality in this culture of death, that we share our hope with others. The answer is to care and to be with others as they journey through these difficult times of their life. It's not there is no one thing I can say or do, but maybe we can make the difference by being there. And by not being there, I guarantee there will not be a difference. I cannot change the world, but I can change the world around me. You can make a difference in the lives of others, and you can help protect them from euthanasia. So that's what the Compassionate Community Care charity works on in this program that it has for visiting. It has a volunteer training program. The other thing it has is if people call the 1-800 line. Right now I'm answering it, so you'll get me. But anyway, the purpose is a lot of people have a lot of difficult questions. So they might be experiencing ending of life medical conditions, or let's say their spouses, and they don't know how to react. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to think, and they need someone to talk about these issues with. And so we provide that. We've gotten quite a few calls. Like we got a call recently from a woman whose husband had asked for euthanasia, and she was completely opposed. She was a Catholic woman. She was completely opposed. She was quite elderly. She was almost 90. Her husband was around the same age. She's a little bit older. And he wanted euthanasia, and he was approved. And so we talked quite a bit about how to deal with this issue to try and convince him that euthanasia should be off the table. This is wrong. And this is the kind of thing that, we've been able to help people with. But we can protect others. We can help them by caring for others. There's only one answer to killing. There's only one answer to the devastation of a culture of death, and that's love. That's the only thing we can truly do to undo that. We are all affected by the legalization of euthanasia because we are human. We experience civil human emotions and feelings. Cultural loneliness affects our health, it affects our quality of life, and it can be a threat to our life. So this is a big reason for compassionate community care. Our next training session is being done on April 29th. If you're interested, you can email me or email info@beingwith.org. It's actually going to be at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And the reason is it's a training session being done for the Diocese of Salt Lake City in Utah, and they're an hour different from you. So it's going to start at 9 p.m. Eastern time, or 7 p.m. in Utah, or 6 p.m. Pacific time. So if you want to sign up for that, you can, and there's not a problem, and we would send you everything by email, all the information you need, etc. There's workbooks, etc. that we can mail to you, but obviously April 29th is coming quickly. Currently, the law requires that a person who requests euthanasia must be competent when you request euthanasia, but the government's discussing expanding euthanasia to people who request it in their power of attorney, in their advance directive, their living will, right? Well, we sell the power of attorney for personal care to the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. It's designed to protect you. It even deals directly with the issue of euthanasia and assisted suicide. It puts in there that I do not want euthanasia. I do not want assisted suicide. And even if I should ask for it, take that as a request for proper pain and symptom management, psychological care, or etc. So in other words, we recognize that somebody who opposes euthanasia might be so darkened by their situation, they might actually ask for it. This means that a person could state in their power of attorney, if we change the law, that if I become incompetent then I approve my life being ended by lethal injection. Now, some of you might remember the story in the Netherlands. There was the case in the Netherlands where the woman had put in her advance directive that if she had dementia, etc., she would want euthanasia. And then when the time came where the doctor came to do it, she resisted. Now she had dementia, but she resisted. So the doctor had put the sedative in her coffee, but she continued to resist. So the doctor had the family hold the woman down as the doctor injected her. And that's the kind of thing you're talking about, because this is a woman who didn't want it, even though she had dementia. This went through the courts in the Netherlands, and in the end, the Dutch Supreme Court said that was okay because the woman was not capable of changing her mind, and therefore, since she had asked for it in the advance directive, therefore we did not know whether or not she didn't want it anymore, even though she had resisted, as crazy as that is. If you designate someone as your power of attorney for personal care to make medical decisions or personal decisions for you, it only comes into effect when you're incompetent. Now, these are legal documents. I always tell people, don't appoint someone to be your medical decision maker who doesn't support your values or beliefs. Don't do that. Don't appoint your oldest daughter to be your medical decision maker if your oldest daughter does not agree with you on your moral beliefs. Don't do that. Appoint someone who does agree with you on your moral beliefs to make decisions for you. Because remember, when the time comes to make these decisions, the document's only legal because you've become incompetent. So you can't make decisions for yourself. You need to appoint someone who shares your values. You can appoint your eldest daughter if she doesn't agree with you on moral issues. You can appoint her to be your financial power of attorney. You can become a member of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, and here's the information. So I think that there is a question and answer session coming to us. And actually, I don't have my clock. It's, oh, I've almost used up all the time. So we're happy to take some questions. And I think Michelle was going to lead that, was she not? Yes.
Thank you, Alex. That was a wonderful presentation, lots of information, lots of good review of what's going on in the legislation and with this new law. I think one of our biggest takeaways from this is we can make a difference in others' lives. And I think that came across very clearly. So thank you for your presentation. We do only have a few moments for questions. It is getting late in Ontario. And I think as Alex gets later, Alex talks faster, but you do that pretty good. So thank you for
I try not to talk too fast today. I often do. I didn't, and maybe that's why it's, as I say, it's 10:53 in my time, and so that's fine.
Yeah.
So we should take some questions here. I think Andrea had a good question, which does a client have to have had a disease condition for a certain duration before being offered MAiD? And the answer is no. The issue is, originally it said that your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable, but you had to have a condition which was considered that you're not going to get better, is basically how it's defined, you know, that so you could have a condition that comes on fairly quickly, and you would qualify. You don't have to be terminally ill anymore, so that's not even an issue. What about elderly patients with dementia? Well, as of the law right now, you can't have euthanasia if you have dementia because you're not capable of asking for it or consenting to it unless you have very early dementia and you're considered to be then still competent, right? But as of this moment, the law does not allow that. But if they were to add it to people for their power of attorney, as I say, so let's say you wrote it in your power of attorney that I would want euthanasia in that medical condition, obviously speaking, that would be done to you. You would not have the choice anymore to say yes or no, because it would be determined that at that point you're incompetent, and they would go ahead and somebody would make the decision to do it, probably the person you appointed as your power of attorney. But I'm sure the doctors would be involved in that, saying, time to go. I understand Jean Truchon took his own life in April 2020. Well, that was a euthanasia, yeah. What came of Nicole Gladue? I believe Nicole Gladue is still around. The truth of it is neither one of them actually wanted euthanasia. And this is the story that doesn't get out unless you are involved with the disability community. Both of them were institutionalized. So the problem with Quebec as compared to Ontario has eliminated most of its institutions. So most people are in what you would call a type of home care setting. People with disabilities are in community care. And so these are like small houses with 3 or 4 or 5 people living together, etc. They're not institutionalized. And in Quebec, you have a high level of institutionalization still. So both of them were institutionalized, and they felt their life had no purpose or value, and they were just simply institutionalized. And that's why they were part of the case. When they were both asked, they were both like, well, we don't actually want to die per se. We want to live, but we feel this is not living. Can you help me understand how such a review of the MAiD bill only requires MPs and senators to participate? Well, I think that stakeholders will be allowed to be involved, Yolande. I think so, but not the committee would be appointed by would have 10 MPs and 5 senators. Now, I'm very concerned because our justice minister, who's a bit of an injustice minister, is very, 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 very pro euthanasia, and I can see that this is going to be one heavily loaded committee. Okay.
Much like the questionnaire.
I shouldn't be down and say things negative, but I'm trying to be honest. I don't want to give you, sugar when there's a lot of vinegar. So just to clarify, under this bill C7, 2 medical professionals still needed. Yes, you'll add 2 medical professionals also still required under bill C7. What are conscience rights? Conscience rights means if I'm a physician and I don't believe it's right to kill you, then I should have the right to say I won't be involved with that. I'm not going to do that. I might have a patient come to me and say, I want to die by euthanasia. And as a medical professional, I should be able to say, I want nothing to do with that. I think that If you want that, I guess that's your legal right, but I want nothing to do with it. In Ontario and in several provinces in Canada, they have to do a referral. Ontario requires an effective referral, which means I don't have to kill you, but I have to send you to the killer. Think about this. During the Second World War, people made a lot of comment after the Second World War that people were being put on trains by people to go to the death camps. Well, isn't that the same thing here? The doctor, if they're forced to send you to the killer, of course they're not willing to do it. If you're not willing to kill, you can't be willing to send them to the killer. If a physician who administered lethal injection MAiD testifies in court, would it be considered perjury when they claim not to have killed? No, I don't think it would even happen. How could it go to court? The law is so ill-defined that there's no possibility to even have it go to court. Can the new hospice keep the Irene Thomas name? I'm assuming the new hospice will keep the Irene Thomas name, but I'm so sad what's happened in Delta, and I'm embarrassed that I live in a country that would expropriate a property from the Delta Hospice Society, which is an independent hospice. Now, I understand that the land was owned by the hospital government, etc. The land was owned by the I guess Fraser Health or whatever, but the building was built by the Delta Hospice. So it was expropriated from them. In any other context, you would call that stolen from them. You would say that because that's what it was. If this was the Soviet Union, you would say, has the Russian dictators come back? You know, this is the kind of thing. And I shouldn't say that because it makes me sound extreme, but isn't this what happened? I'm sorry to say. Isn't that what happened? All our lives are threatened by euthanasia. Absolutely, Yolande. We have to understand what it means to be human. I agree. We are human beings. A lot of us like to think of ourselves as being like autonomous beings who are free to make any decisions what we want, and we forget what it means to be human. As someone with dementia in a hospital, and the team and the teams know he's confused most of the time, is he in danger if he asks or is coerced? The problem, Betty Ray, with this question is the person actually deemed to be competent or not? Because competence is the whole issue here. If they are considered incompetent, they cannot be approved for euthanasia. Now, remember the change in Bill C-7 said if they were already approved and became incompetent, then they could die by euthanasia. It still requires someone to be approved based on competence. So you're saying if someone with dementia, so if someone has early dementia, or let's say someone has dementia but is deemed to be competent, then of course, yes, they could die by euthanasia. So that is a reality, okay? The question is competence. Now, how is competence determined? Well, that has a lot to do with competence assessments, and that really varies based on the physician or medical care person who's actually doing the assessment. So you have to be pretty honest about how this stuff works, right? Some of my thoughts on reasoning with a friend in this position would likely sound like guilting someone into refusing MAiD. We don't have to guilt anybody. No, I think we have to talk to them about how important they are in our lives. I think we have to, we have to recognize that as a human being, I need to be affirmed. It's natural that someone might be feeling that there is no purpose to their life. But then when you point out, well, what about your grandchildren? Is it possible that you can go visit your grandchildren? Is it possible? What about your children? What about your friends? What about them? What about these? You start talking about things that we recognize as having purpose. And as I say, we have to find little purposes in people's life. Because if they are actually going through a life-limiting condition, they recognize and you recognize that they're going to die. Okay, so that's not an issue of, well, 10 years from now, we find little purposes, little things. I can come visit, saying to someone, I'm going to come visit you tomorrow. What time is a good time? Makes them think about, oh, so-and-so is going to visit me at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. I've got something to look forward to. This seems to be directly related to culture of ageism. Well, you're right, a culture of ageism, but also look how the people with disabilities have recognized how there's a culture of negativity in our culture towards people with disabilities. Let's be brutally honest, there is negativity in the culture towards people who have, quote, quote, special needs. Every province territory laws are different for power of attorneys. That's correct, Yolande. Do you have suggestions on how to adapt? Yeah, we actually have a BC document. Is it for Yukon? I haven't seen the Yukon document. The other thing is, Yolande, you can there's a service you can go to, and you can print up a power of attorney, and there's different documents for different provinces. Now, most provinces in Canada actually have the same type of document. So if you're in Saskatchewan or Ontario, there really isn't a difference, or Manitoba, Ontario, there really isn't a difference. But BC is very different, Yolanda.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
The
The
Alex,
BC document is very different.
yeah, Alex,
Yep.
the Catholic Health Association of
Yep.
BC has a document, an advance directive document, so it has all this information in it.
Yes.
It's easy to download from their site, and you
Yeah,
don't
so
need to go through a lawyer.
that's
So
right. You don't need a lawyer,
yeah,
whether you're in Ontario or whether in BC.
yeah,
Correct. That's correct.
yeah.
Angel, so basically, what can we do to change this? And at the same time, how can we help people who want euthanasia? Well, Angel, the only way I can truly make a difference in somebody's life is if I actually have a relationship with them. This is the
Mhm.
reality. When I have a relationship with somebody, I have an ability to communicate with them. They have a trust with me. If I don't know somebody at all, unless they actually call me up, like unless someone's calling me up to ask me my opinion and we have a time to talk. I got a call from someone who wanted to die by euthanasia, and we got talking on the phone. They didn't want to die by euthanasia at all. They didn't want that at all. This was a woman who had some significant health conditions. She was on an oxygen tank because she had COPD, and with the COVID situation, no one was visiting her at all anymore. She couldn't go out shopping. She was really down. She was really, really, really down. No question about it. She didn't actually want to die,
Mhm.
but she wanted out of her bad situation. So she called me. So that was different. I could talk to her. But if I didn't know her from anybody, then obviously I would be looking for, if somebody's a friend of theirs and they say, I have a friend with COPD, I would then try and go through with different techniques of talking to somebody. Because remember, listening and responding is very important when you listen first. With the
Mhm.
COVID pandemic, how do people work with community care? Well, right now, you're asking people to do phoning. I'll give you an example. The Knights of Columbus in Ontario, we've been really emphasizing with this program, are you phoning the members who are older on your membership list?
Mhm.
Are you phoning them?
Mhm.
Some of them are locked in. Some of them have been shut in for many times. Like right now, Ontario just experienced a new shutdown.
Mhm.
Right, the province just decided, if you look at the news, they're going to shut us right down again. Well, what does that happen to? How does this? How do people who are really shut in their homes or in an institution, how are they going to deal with this? It's very difficult. Are doctors forced to refer to another doctor if they themselves refuse to offer MAiD? Okay, I'm not 100% sure in British Columbia, but I'm assuming that there is a type of referral that's required. What makes Ontario different than other provinces is this term effective referral. So
Mhm.
referrals are not new. So if you're going to a physician and you're asking the physician for something the physician thinks is absolutely not something they're going to have anything to do with, they will refer you to a physician. So let's say it's not their specialty, but even if a physician feels that the relationship between you and the physician isn't really possible to be an effective physician for you, they might suggest, well, maybe you should go to another physician because we're not
Mhm.
really. That's not uncommon. What is now a difficulty is if you're told to send someone for euthanasia or send someone, like in the issue of euthanasia, the issues of abortion, then obviously it's the same thing. Doctor being told you have to send them to the doctor who will do the act. Now that's a requirement of participation, right?
Mhm.
Required to participate. What about a person who has mental illness and later on in life has been diagnosed with cancer? With cancer then? Yeah, so how the law has worked already is people with mental illness have already been dying by euthanasia, but they had to have another condition. It was euthanasia for mental illness alone. Now you might have noticed in your newspapers, if you follow the issues, and I published it, that during the euthanasia for mental illness debate in the Senate, there was a psychiatrist, I think his name is Dwight Smith or something like that. Maybe I better look at it. I don't want to say the wrong name and get in trouble. There was a psychiatrist in BC who admitted he had done 2 euthanasias of people with mental illness, and he knew of others that had been done.
Mhm.
That was in BC. There was no doctors in Ontario that admitted that, but there was
Mhm.
in or Derek's something like that. It was. I better pull it up. I don't have to say names and get in trouble.
Mhm.
But I did report it and write about it. Where can I get the document to protect me? From the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition,
Mhm.
and you could find me by emailing me or by someone could put my email address, or as in BC, as Michelle was talking about, the Catholic Health Association has a document. Are
Okay.
doctors forced to refer to another doctor if they refuse to participate in BC? I think they're going to have do some type of referral. Michelle may know better than I do about exactly how things work in BC. The whole issue is that are they forced to refer to the killing doctor? And I don't think that that's necessarily the case. Now, most provinces have also that 1-800 line. So doctors are then telling them that I won't have anything to do with it, but if you call the medical helpline, they would refer you. That to me is too closely associated, because you're actually giving them a line which will actually give them the euthanasia.
Yeah.
I don't believe
maybe
in
we'll
killing.
just
I don't
take,
believe you should ever be involved.
right.
And I recall the Margot Bentley case. That was a little bit different. Margot Bentley said that she wouldn't want to be that way, but she was still eating by spoon. She was still being fed and she was eating by spoon.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think that can be our last question. Thank you so much, Alex, for all your information, all the help. We will put out the information where you can contact Alice or have a look at his blog. There's lots of information on there. And we appreciate your time and your talking with us this evening. Thank you.
Yeah, the Compassionate Community Care number, you can call that, or you can go to the Compassionate Community Care website. It's info@beingwith.org if you want to actually register for the upcoming course. What is the wording on the death certificate? I think this is important. In Canada, they're forced to lie on the death certificate. They can't say that the person died from euthanasia, assisted suicide, MAiD. They have to say that they died of cancer or whatever it was. Okay, so they have to lie on the death certificate in Canada.
Yeah. All right. I think we'll just leave it there. Okay. Thank you, Alex. Thank you for all your time. And we'll be sending out.
You can email Michelle.
Yeah, you can. And we'll send out information. This recording will be, this presentation was recorded. We'll send you out the record of that. It was a little bit choppy, but that's, Alex said, was kind of his internet at his line, at his end. So, and we'll send out links to all the different documents that we had up on the slides. So thanks, Alex. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.